Are you a Pennsylvania family historian with German roots? Well, you share that background with millions of others around the country that also have German roots here in Pennsylvania. Your ancestors likely came here in the 1700s or 1800s, and luckily the Germans kept really great records, so you were probably able to trace your ancestors back to their county and maybe even to the ship that they arrived here on. However, there are challenges and misconceptions and mistakes we make in German research, and we're really fortunate to have Jim Beidler, who is an expert in German research, wrote numerous books on how to research your German ancestors, books that you probably want to add to your bookshelf if you're really trying to track down where they came from in Germany, down to the exact location and church. So Jim is going to fill us in on mistakes people make in their German research, great resources to use, and also his hopes for the future in terms of genealogy. He's been at this for decades, and people like Jim, we want their wisdom, we want their experience, so we don't make the same mistakes that were made before. Jim is also going to tell us about an exciting International German Genealogy Conference coming up this July, and the link for that will also be in the show notes. There's a special discount if you register before the end of March. So if it works out for you, this might be a great opportunity to take the resources that Jim provides, as well as the future conference, and really make that big difference in your German research. And now, here's Jim. And here we are with James Beidler, who is an expert in Pennsylvania German ancestors. Jim, welcome to the podcast. I can't wait for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and also about your earliest Pennsylvania ancestor. I know you've got to have them with all your research.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be on the podcast, Denise. So, yeah, it took me a long time before I found an ancestor who was not from Pennsylvania. As I like to say, my pedigree has Pennsylvania German farmer stacked on top of Pennsylvania German farmer. But so I have, as far as the very earliest, the very earliest in America were some of the Dutch in New Netherland, who then came to Berks County in the early 1700s. And then I also have quite a number in the kind of original Palatines group in the Hank Jones books, who then came to the Tulpehocken region. But as far as the very first one in Pennsylvania, I'm not sure I know that.
It's funny that it's a group that's hard to research, isn't it? Before the Revolutionary War, let's say. How hard is it to research those German speakers at that time?
Yeah, well, I guess this is truly, and it's all relative answer, because I would say they're a whole lot easier to research, say, versus the Scots-Irish, because you have huge numbers of church and pastoral records for the Pennsylvania Germans, where, again, using the example of the Scots-Irish, there are virtually no Presbyterian records from the 1700s. So I would say, probably the biggest thing is the language barrier, as far as, both in terms of the fact that these original records, when you get to the original records, are in the German language, and they're in a chicken scratchy cursive script if you're looking at the absolute originals. And then also getting the Pennsylvania German culture and the Germanic culture, like naming patterns and things like that may seem odd if you're not immersed in that heritage.
So the books that you've written a lot of books. Genealogists love them. Every time I run across someone at a conference or a workshop and they're struggling with their German ancestors, they recommend your books. And did you write those to help people with the chicken scratch and the and the naming conventions and sort of all the cultural background with the Germans? What was your inspiration for writing those?
Well, honest truth, the inspiration for the very first one was that family tree books. So then that then was owned by F&W Publishing, which also published Family Tree magazine. I had been a freelance contributor to the magazine for about a decade, and they were restarting their genealogy books line. And they wanted an ethnic series. And if you're going to do a genealogy ethnic series, inevitably you start with German because there are more Germans in America than any other ethnic group. So they came to me for the very first one, the Family Tree German Genealogy Guide. Oh, and after I got through what seemed like absolute torture, because I was always a short form writer. My weekly newspaper column that's 500 words, and my German Life column that's averages about 800 words. But doing a book that was 80,000 words was more than I had done before. And then as soon as I was through with that one and realized that I had indeed not died, then I was eager to say, yeah, hey, I can do another one. Oh, and so that led to Trace Your German Roots Online, just focusing just on online sources. And then once I did that one, I sold them on the idea of one on newspapers and genealogy, because I was a first career journalist. I was a copy editor, newspaper copy editor for about 20 years. And so I saw how the sausage was made as far as obituaries and so forth, and thought that this is a hugely underused record group by genealogists, and also that there was no good guidebook out there. So I filled the void with that. And then my latest or current book is the Family Tree Atlas of Germany. And that again, I went to them, and because they had done products, a genealogist guide to European maps and to American state maps. And I'm like, you could do one just on Germany, and that has become for me a bestseller, because people just fell in love with the maps, and they did a good job with it. And then I've also done independent from them, just as a self-published thing. I've created collections, a book collection of my newspaper columns.
Oh, that's fantastic. And if people want to keep up with your newspaper column, they go to your website,
Mm-hmm.
which is your name, correct?
Well, for the column, the easiest thing is go to roots-branches.com, because that's a separate website just for the column. And then there's a way to sign up to get an email every time a new one is published.
All right, excellent. So people can do that. And then your books are for sale on, I know I've seen them on Amazon. Is that the best place to buy them, or would you prefer that people buy them in another publisher?
Well, there, if you go to jamesmbeidler.com,
Yeah.
there are Amazon links.
Okay.
And full disclosure, I get a cut out of that way. So yeah, that's the preference for those books. Also on my website, then for the book of Roots and Branches columns, is a link to Masthoff, the publisher in Morgantown at the southern end of Berks County.
Okay. All right. Excellent. And I'll put this all in the show notes so people can just easily click and get the links. The book of maps, the German maps especially, is the one that everyone's like, you got to get it. If you're researching German ancestors and you're trying to make that leap across the pond, as they say, you're just going to get lost if you don't have a map, a decent map.
Well, and not just a decent map, but you need maps over time, maps from the time period that you're researching, because of course, the old saw about Germany is that it was, thousands of small states. in the medieval times and even up to the early modern period.
So what is I just said people have always given me this advice to get some decent maps, for research. But what's the biggest mistake people do make in researching their Pennsylvania ancestors, those German speakers?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Well, I think there are two that I'd point out. One would be on the naming. Oh, the naming culture that they brought over from the German states. And when we talk Pennsylvania Germans, properly, we're talking about people who came in colonial times. If they came later, they're German Americans, and that's a different tribe entirely. But for the Pennsylvania Germans, they just about all named the males with the first name Johann, the women with the first name Anna or Mariah, and then they went by what we would call the middle name. To them, it was the Rufname, that is the call, literally means call name in German. So you would have in a family a Johann Sebastian, Johann Samuel, Johann Peter, and they'd go by Sebastian Anton Peter. Oh, and so this is very confusing to people, because people will see a reference to a Johann Sebastian and a Sebastian, and then somebody using the nickname Bastian, and they'll think they're three separate people when they're really all usually just one man. So that's the first thing, and then the second thing is being a little too blindered as far as use of those church records, because I find loads of people who get the wrong geographic clues of thinking, well, it's only, the only church records that are going to apply will be the ones closest to where my ancestor lived. And with, especially in the 1700s into the 1800s, as the pastors rode circuits, baptisms and marriages and even burials end up in different places. You may be familiar with Schwarzwald Church in eastern Berks County. Well, loads of people say, oh yeah, and I know my ancestors were married at Schwarzwald Church. And I laugh because then I see they're actually from western Berks County. And I can pretty much guarantee them they never set foot in Schwarzwald Church, but the same pastor as was the pastor there, was the pastor of their church elsewhere. And that's how they ended up in that book. And then likewise related to that is many of the pastors kept their own personal registers that they may or may not have entered into congregational registers. And so to do a full search, and this is a meat of one of my lectures on finding Pennsylvania Germans, is start yes with the church closest to where your ancestor lived, but then radiate out and make sure you're checking other churches in the same parish, whether there are private pastoral registers from that era, even into other counties, cross county lines for ancestors who live close to those county boundaries.
And that's a huge thing that you just mentioned, that the minister could be coming to them versus them going to the minister. I think people sometimes, with our modern transportation and our thinking, I mean, to go 40 miles is like no big deal. But to go 40 miles in 1760 was a huge deal. I
That was a
mean,
couple days ride,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. I've had people try to convince me that their ancestor went to this church on Sundays that was 40, 50 miles away. And I'm like, what? They'd spent 3 days getting there and 3 days getting back? Like, it's just,
Presentism is, yeah, which I say is, exactly what you said, putting modern times, putting your modern thoughts about how things are into the 1700s. That's something you should always be guarding against. But
yeah.
but yeah, back when I was still doing professional research on my own, I received an email from somebody who was claiming that they had a table of children for a pair of ancestors lined up, and first one's baptized in Schuylkill County, the next one in York County, the next one Schuylkill County, the next one York County. And I just immediately laughed and went back to him and said, well, you've got at least two families that you've put together here, because exactly what you're saying, these are communities that are far, far apart, and they would not be moving back and forth between likely once, let alone several times.
Right, right. And for people listening that aren't familiar with the topography or the geography of these places, I mean, we've got hills, we've got creeks, close to rivers sometimes, like fast moving waters. I mean, this is not easy. It's not flat. It's not an easy trip to get around these places.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I wanted to ask you this question because I guess with the pandemic going on as long as it has and all the changes going around in our country, I have this, I've just been thinking a lot about the future, and like what's next in genealogy or what's next for all of us. What is your hope with all your experience in genealogy and all your years in? Like, what do you hope the next generation picks up and carries on into the future? Because I think we're going to see some pivots, and I don't know what they are. I have no crystal ball, I have no prediction, but I think we're going to see some pivots in genealogy in terms of our focus or maybe our interests, as genealogists. So, what do you hope people pick up or carry on like 20 years from now or 10 years from now?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and this is something I think about. I had a good mentor in John Humphrey, who died way too young, way too soon, and I'm now just 4 years younger than he was when he passed. And so yeah, I thought a lot about this, and I have you know been trying to mentor people and recommend other genealogists for lecturing and so forth. And the big thing I see as far as bigger picture, and I see this also at Legacy Tree Genealogists, where I'm a research reports editor. Uh, the mechanics of putting together a family tree have gotten easier with ancestry, with the digitization of things on family search. I mean, you still see many errors, and really it's not that mechanical, finding the records. It's doing analysis on the records that I think is going to be more and more of a genealogist's job. In other words, it's not as much anymore the ferreting out. It's the, well, now you got it, but does this really apply to your person? Oh, and that's not easy. That requires, oh well, maybe some books that could give you good guidance, but also just repetitions, and being able to learn about what the customs are. And I'm constantly learning things that kind of hit me over the head now, that I thought, well, why didn't I think of that 20 years ago? And just things like what we call original church registers, original handwritten church registers. Well, what I realize more and more, and this is both in Germany as well as Pennsylvania German ones, in a lot of cases what we call originals are really recopied handwritten records. A pastor like the Reverend Johann Caspar Stover, early Lutheran pastor in the eastern Pennsylvania area. He kept a private register, and it's different than most church registers in that it's not chronological. He organizes his baptisms by family.
Hmm.
And I just thought, oh yeah, that's the Stover style, that's a variant. Well, what savvy researchers realized, savvy historians realized, is that that's the result of him late in life recopying his register and reformatting it into family groups like that. Which then brings you to the point of thinking, how many errors did he make when he recopied that thing? And that we need to treat this with a little bit less reverence, so to say, than we would if it was the original contemporaneously written one.
Good, good advice. And
You're always learning something.
yeah, isn't it the truth? I mean, I really think, with each family we research or each geography, there's always a record set or a way to look at the records in that area it's just sometimes it's a huge difference, but a lot of times it's just a slight
Yes.
change of perspective that you need,
Hmm.
due to the ethnic group or the time period. And yeah, that's where people like yourself, through your books and your writings, can help get our heads straight or fill it with enough information, so when we look at the records, then we're looking not with our presentism, but with our, as best we can muster, 18th century brain or 19th century brain. With the pandemic ongoing and our lives, still in this virtual space, is there somewhere that you're teaching online coming up, or if people want to connect with you through a conference and get some of this great information from you about their Pennsylvania Germans, what's your schedule like for 2021?
Well, my schedule is very similar to what my normal lecturing schedule is. It's just that it's all virtual. As a matter of fact, I'm more busy with what I would call monthly meeting type lectures, where genealogy groups, across the country that previously would not have wanted to fly in a speaker to talk to their monthly meeting live, now are like, hey, we can just get them on a Zoom. So I have a lot of those. They're on jamesmbeidler.com. But the big thing I'm working on is for the International German Genealogy Partnership. We are a consortium of partner groups around the world that focus on German speaking genealogy. And we're doing a virtual conference July 17th to the 24th. We're planning two live days with the absolute marquee speakers, and then probably about 60 on demand sessions that people can register for as a package. We're also going to have connections like Zoom breakouts for people, Pomeranians or Bavarians or whatever your specific interest is, as well as a virtual exhibit hall. So this we're we're hoping to make this mimic what were two very successful in-person conferences that were held in 2017 in Minneapolis and 2019 in Sacramento. So for July 17th to the 24th online.
What a great opportunity with that online environment because of the breakout room. Like, you can be sure to run into, so to speak, unlike in a live conference, but be sure to connect with people that are researching in a similar geography or surnames as you. And that's fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And unlike the 17 and 19 conferences where being held in America, we had a relatively small number of Germans, despite having a lot of German partner groups in the partnership. We're hoping that without the travel expense factor, and we're trying to make the program, especially a genealogist in Germany, friendly.
Oh, I can't wait. Last summer I did the British Institute, which was fantastic.
Mhm.
And I was like, well, now I need a German one. And here you are with like the ultimate conference. So
That's
I
the
can't
hope.
wait. I
Yes.
can't wait. My Germans are much later. They came in the 1840s in that wave,
Right.
leaving that unrest. I think I do have I didn't finish the research. I it I feel like this is like a confessional booth. I do have a Heberling line that was in Center County. And the only other place I can find that surname is in the northern part of Berks County that became Northampton County in the 1700s, but I haven't connected them yet. I mean, they should be connected, but I haven't done the, courthouse research and the, everything that needs to be done, but we'll see.
I have a Heberling line.
Do you? We could be related, like
We
eighth
very
cousins or something.
we very well could be. But yeah, this one is centered kind of around the Muddy Creek, Adamstown area. So,
Oh,
yeah, at least
okay.
in the 1700s. I lose the surname in the early 1800s. So,
I know that line.
but
Isn't that the line
yeah.
that were gun makers in the Revolutionary War or
I
something?
don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. It's a Rudolph Heberling.
Yes, yes, there's a
Okay.
Rudolph and there's like
Okay.
a
Yeah.
Valentine.
Now, have you
Uh,
eliminated them as yours, or?
I
Uh,
just haven't gotten through all the
okay.
records.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't, it was one of
Yeah.
those. I get obsessed with this line I have in Montgomery County because the one guy was orphaned. And so every
Yeah.
time I go to like HSP, I end up like researching this line. But I want to get back to these Heberlings or whatever, because it's a neat family, those early settlers. Every time I research a line, don't you just like sink into the time period and you just become, I don't want to say obsessed because that makes it sound like it's not healthy, and it's totally healthy and normal. But I just really surround myself with like, I don't know, like I want to like know the furniture that they sat on and the clothes that they wore and sort of like how they transported themselves and what the building looked like. Like I get really into the whole time setting. I don't know. I don't know if you
Yeah.
do the same thing.
Well, to a limited degree, and I do have my Beidler ancestor, fifth great grandfather Conrad Beidler. A house he built in 1783 is in the Berks County Park system,
Oh, nice.
and so that stone house has a special cachet for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you go up and like visit it sometimes? And
Yeah, they have a candlelight afternoon every
okay.
December in normal years,
Yeah.
and they dress me up as the spirit of Conrad Beidler. So,
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, that's so exciting. Oh, I love it. Okay. So, is there anything else you'd like to leave us with before we go? We'll make sure to put a link for your website so people can connect with you and follow up and make sure to register for that German genealogy conference, the international one.
the only other thing I'd say is just to reiterate that analysis is very important, and a lot of people can do their own analysis, but that's become a special thing for legacy tree genealogists, for the clients that we take on, to make sure that we give them, not just a race to see how many ancestors you can find, but to make sure that they're meticulously documented.
Ah, good. So everyone, do your documentation. Make sure you have all your people with all the documents you can get. Jim, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I hope I get to see you in front of the Beidler house in December.
That would be great.
Did you enjoy the part of the episode where Jim and I discovered that we could be like seventh or eighth cousins through a distant ancestor whose last name is Heberling or Heverling? That was quite a surprise, but that's the way it is when you do Pennsylvania research. You go back far enough, and we're even closer than 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon here in this state. So stay tuned for the future when archives and courthouses open back up, and maybe I solve the mystery if James Beidler and I are in fact related. So don't forget to check out the show notes and the links for all the resources mentioned in the episode. Would love to hear from you at paancestors.com. If there's something you'd like to see on an upcoming episode, the next season will be released at the end of May. So we're going to wrap this up before Easter, which is coming up shortly. I know, hard to believe because we're deep in snow here in Pennsylvania. So this is Denise Allen getting ready to dig out of more snow coming in Pennsylvania. And I hope you make lots of discoveries on your Pennsylvania ancestors.